I was in my first semester of university. I had just graduated college not long ago, and had entered into a program that, after a while, I would come to resent. During that time, with adjusting and taking daily transit, an hour and a half away from where I grew up, into the big city in order to study was somewhat of a new adventure to me. In a lot of ways, I was just beginning to sprout as my own individual and trying to carve a path for my life while simultaneously opening myself up to new experiences and a new environment. I have longtime friends who go to the same facility as me, but at that time, our schedules wouldn't always line up. This meant that a lot of my days were spent traveling back and forth and walking around the city alone. I really wanted to try and expand my horizon of experiences and friends during this period. In a lot of ways, I was really desiring to find a good community on campus that could help satiate my boredom and loneliness. I can be extremely extroverted, but sometimes I find that it takes a lot out of me to try and actually pursue and maintain friendships that haven't been established years prior. I've made friends before from different classes in college, but ultimately, and I know this makes me a bit of an asshole, but I would end up texting less and less, and eventually either side would just end up ghosting one or the other. Because I'm a busy guy, I don't find myself prioritizing people who I feel like aren't as important to me as others. I know, a shitty thing to say, but nonetheless, the truth. One day, however, I met Joel. I was on the phone with my fiancée, and I distinctly remember exactly how it all went down. As I was walking out of the school's Starbucks with a decaf coffee, I had one headphone in and was heading to class through a small stretch of underground passageway under the streets that connect the school's library building to the actual building that possesses classes. As I was hastily making my way, I saw this short and stout guy, looking roughly my age at the time, 21, with thick brown beard and a hat on. Our eyes met, and as I was about to simply walk past, he asked me something in a very charismatic and calm tone. "Hey, sorry to bother you. You look like a pretty busy guy, but I was wondering, do you mind doing a survey about religion? It's for one of my classes." To this, I regret answering and wish I had simply continued walking, but at the time, I was becoming more and more compelled by the notion of a formal religious institution and questioning my own religious faith, particularly leaning towards Christianity. "Sure," I replied cordially. He then introduced himself as Joel, and after we went through a small survey pertaining to religious affiliations and perspectives on religion, Joel informed me that a small group of students like him were planning on getting together as a group and discussing various religions in order to gather new insights and create a community. Of course, with the prospect of finding some new friends on campus and also exploring my own spirituality perspectives, I gave him my phone number after he asked for it, and He said that he would contact me in a few days. Upon entering our first meeting, I sat down on a very crowded place with seats at our school's facility and was greeted by Joel alongside a bunch of other members. They introduced themselves to me and vice versa, and they were all extremely kind to me. We began our small group meeting, and I was a bit shocked to find that the sole topic that we were discussing was Christianity. I wasn't aware that we were going to be discussing Christianity, which was against what he had proposed this group to constitute upon our meeting in the tunnel. That being said, I was still curious enough to continue, and I was accompanied by 3 other young guys of my age, who after a bit of talking with, I found out we had a lot of similar interests. Joel, who now presented himself as a leader of our study group, relayed how we would be analyzing Christianity through a multi-step program designed to unveil the holy power associated with the religion to us. Since I was curious and wanted to learn more about the religion as well as having made some new friends, I continued to attend this study group for the rest of the semester, in which there were a few circumstances where I questioned Joel's interpretations and was met with hard resistance. It felt like at times my wavering belief in what Joel was saying would be met with straight dismissal as opposed to actual conversation. I continued to brush that off as the group that I was working with got closer. The school's club, which I was now a part of, provided me with exactly what I had wanted. We even went to church-run events together, where I quit vaping, and many individuals reported mystical experiences. Things only started to get concerning with Joel during our one-on-one conversations. I discussed my personal experiences and beliefs in my newfound religious belief and all of my former spiritual experiences as well, and Joel exposed me to a story and a few incidents that at the time I definitely should have seen as the red flags that they were. For example, when he was younger, he had gone on a retreat where when he was in prayer he said that he began to hear the voice of God talk to him. I questioned at first if he was referring to the voice of God as more of a metaphor, but he reassured me that he literally heard God speak to him before. When he told me this, I became a bit unnerved. At the helm of this community was Joel, but in all other senses, I was satisfied with who I was with and what we were doing together. Though I'm not entirely dismissive of strange occurrences, especially pertaining to spirituality, his experience of talking with God in his head came off as somewhat uncomfortable for me. He also said that the way he would pray would involve a direct conversation and reply with God. Out of discomfort, I wouldn't prod him on what he meant by this. This, of course, was just the beginning. After the summer had ended, I had found myself in the most religiously devoted state I'd ever been. Throughout the summer, I had a treacherous injury which made me housebound for months, and I had to call upon God in a lot of ways for strength. With my newfound devotion, I was elated to fall back into a community that had nurtured and developed me and my thoughts throughout the last semester, relating to something that I found deep joy in. At the first lesson of the semester, something was very different. Joel, as before, was at the helm of our study session, but was now repetitively interrupted by people coming to greet him and give him praise. It was so bad that we literally essentially sat and watched for 20 minutes before we could get on with our lesson, as more than 10 people, mostly young men of our age, came to greet this man. As aforementioned, when not unnerving, he was extremely charming and gave the impression that he cared deeply for everyone. Once our lesson began, he introduced us to the second phase of the program. He explained that this was one of the toughest programs of the different levels that there were, as it required even more devotion and, more importantly, an emphasis on sacrifice for those who engaged. He showed us a diagram of a small stick person, and he then showed us the program. He mentioned that we would have to accept Jesus as the center of our life. He explained that by making our lives surround Jesus entirely, that we would not be losing something but gaining. He also began to go over the notion that sex before marriage is a sin, and that if we were to continue this program, we would have to make the sacrifice of giving up sex in our relationships and prove that we weren't. He said that many guys weren't able to continue because of it. I talked about this afterwards with one of the members of the group, who, not unlike me, had been in a serious relationship with someone they loved for years. In my personal opinion, though, we weren't married on an altar. I knew that both me and this other member felt devoted to our partners as if we were already married in a sense, and we both expressed how Joel's behavior surrounding this was way off-putting, controlling, and intrusive. After our lesson, I was a bit dumbfounded by the intensity with which he gave his speech about his new program that we would be engaging in this semester. Joel and I sat down for a few more minutes and talked, in which I expressed experiences of devotion from the summer and explained my entire catastrophic experience with my injury. He then went on to tell me that at times he was actually able to know things beforehand. This seemingly random and strange statement shocked me. He said, for example, he was able to know something another member had before they had even mentioned it, and in a way that he described it, it sounded as if he was saying he had some form of mystical foresight. I was a bit jarred, to say the least, though I felt like it would be impolite to question any further. Joel then went on to tell me that he believed that if I successfully completed this program, was primed to become a teacher for the first program that I had done the semester prior, leading others who would join, and that I had a bright future in the organization. In that moment, with what he had laid down on us in the lesson, I felt overwhelmed by his expectations of me. It also became evident that Joel was not a student at our facility. In fact, he was in his mid-30s and most definitely had kids. He was actually just part of an organization that recruits people to become Christians and missionaries that work on our campus. This means that he actually lied to me when I had our first conversation with him when we met in the tunnel. He wasn't a student. There was no group talking about various religions, and his whole purpose was to convert me to make me join the organization that he was a part of. At this point, school began to pick up a lot, and I was also working a part-time job to help support myself. As I was on the train to head back home the next week, I had forgotten that my second lesson of the program that semester was supposed to happen, so I text Joel saying, "Hey man, I actually got into the train and forgot about our lesson. Sorry about that, dude. I'm not going to be able to make it as I also have work later." To which he replied, "Can you get off the train? Try and get here as soon as possible." I was a bit dumbfounded at this question. Since I live an hour and a half away, it wasn't as easy as getting off the train and heading back in the opposite direction, and he knew that. He knew the area I lived in is remote and a long distance away. I also told him that I had to work, which he had plainly disregarded. I replied, "No man, unfortunately I can't come. Have a good lesson." To which he said again, "Come on man, just get off the train and come back." At this point I was annoyed. Not only did I feel like he was commanding me, but that he was also blatantly disregarding the fact that I said no and that I had work to do that day. I didn't answer him. I talked with my fiancée about how I was starting to feel about the whole ordeal, and how I felt guilty about having feelings of wanting to distance myself from the group, while simultaneously not wanting to lose the community and friends that I had established along the way. My fiancée told me that by the way that Joel was acting, and with his regards to the things that he said, that she was starting to become uncomfortable with the whole situation. I remember sitting in bed, thinking about leaving the group and how the prospect made me feel physically ill. After all, I had been given everything I wanted in a community, except at the helm was a seemingly increasingly controlling and persuasive being who was making me and possibly other members more miserable. There was an event the following Friday that was going to be at the church, which was organized by the community. Originally, since many of my friends from this group were going, I intended to go too, but alas, I was scheduled by my boss to work that day, so there was no way that I was going to be able to even attend. I knew that Joel will be insistent upon me coming anyways, so when Joel texted me reminding me that the event was Friday, I told him that I wasn't able to go because I had work. To this he replied and simply said, "What, bro? No way. You've got to come. Take work off and find someone to take your shift. God wants you there." I was expected. He dismissed my decision and also said that I had to be there because God wanted me there, as if he was the mouthpiece. I went on to text him again and informed him, "No, sorry man, I can't do that. I just got a promotion and I have to be there. I truly hope you guys have a great time anyways." To which he then replied similarly to what he had done before. This was my personal breaking point. He knew the importance of my financial situation, and his dismissal of my personal boundaries as well as his commanding made me decide to text him, explaining that I was done with the group and that I wanted to pursue my own religious exploration without the group from then on. I felt as if he was slowly but surely increasingly controlling me and trying to take what he could, commanding me as if he were the leader of my life in any way possible. It was even up to him if I could fuck my fiancée. He replied with a long paragraph persisting in this sort of overly kind manner that I had to continue with the group, and that it was God's will for me to show up to this event, even though I was completely unable to. He was certain that this group was meant for me, and that God had told him that this was where I was supposed to be. After I responded again, telling him to stop and that I would not go, he sent me another paragraph of similar length, repeating what he had said. No matter what I would say and however I would say no, he would overstep my boundaries while maintaining a kind and friendly tone in order to try to push me into submission when I had clearly said I wasn't going to comply. At this point I said I did not want to talk to him anymore, to which he replied, "Bro, why can't we meet up?" with a smiley face emoji. He continued, "I want you to explain why you don't want to continue, bro. So can we meet up and do that so that I can get a better sense and we can figure out what we can do from there?" Even in this, I knew he was trying to push for a chance at bringing me back into his group and continuing this reign of control. I said I didn't want to, so he asked again. It was at that moment I decided I needed to block him, so I did. A semester later, I was walking down the street of my school, and I was walking by the pizza parlor, and lo and behold, who came out? Joel. Walked over to me with a friend of his, to whom he introduced me to as one of his buddies. I uncomfortably stood there, and his friend went inside for a moment while Joel turned around to me. He looked at me and asked with his disarming gentleness, "Did you block me?" I replied yes. He then said, "You should unblock me. That way we can meet up and talk, because I really want to know why you left the group." Which frustrated me to the point where all I could say was okay, and then went on my way. That night he texted me on my Instagram insisting that we meet up again, so I blocked him there too. In short, I'm thankful for my fiancée, who is the love of my life. Without her, I'm not sure I would have been strong enough to have left the group and his control. The fact of the matter is that there were other guys in the group who had absolutely nobody. They had nothing, and they were prime targets for a charismatic, controlling freak. There were members of that group who were in higher levels, so to speak, who had done all the programs, who seemed as if they were indoctrinated, but they had become so restricted. The fundamentals that their lives were based on, the openness to new experiences, were significantly thwarted. Everyone, beware of who you let into your life. And just because somebody nicely comes up to you and they try to talk to you about all things that may interest you, it does not mean that they do not have ulterior motives. Also, learn to stand your ground and respect yourself. If you say no, mean it. So Joel, you controlling cult leader. Let's not meet again. Kia ora kahoa. Grim here. Thank you all so very much for coming along and listening today. This is the first story out of many that I'm going to read in this audio. It was a long one, so I hope it wasn't too overbearing. But I do hope that you continue along with the rest of them also. Before I get into them though, I will just jump in and say a couple of things. Firstly, I'm sorry I haven't been releasing as many videos lately. I do plan to increase the number back to 3 a day. Not 3 a day, 3 a week. So stay tuned for that. At least I will keep an update on my YouTube community. And yeah, I don't really think I've got too much else to say. To be fair, I said a couple of things, but I really only had that to say, to be fair. I hope you guys enjoy the rest of this, and that it helps those who are struggling to fall asleep. As always, I'm Grim, and sit back, relax, and, well, sleep. When I was about 9 or 10, I was invited to a classmate's birthday at some swimming baths. All of us were about the same age. It was a small class, about 20 kids, and I'm pretty sure that everyone was invited. Just to clarify, in this situation, I am a boy. Anyway, I kind of got separated from everyone, and it was just me and this girl alone. I wasn't particularly close friends with her, but I did know her as she was in my class. To describe the location we were in, it was a tunnel that connected the main wave pool to a lazy river. There wasn't really anybody else in there, just her and I, when she suddenly lunged at me without warning. She grabbed my head and held it underwater. I was a pretty skinny kid, and she was much bigger than me, and a bit of a tomboy. About 20 seconds went by as I furiously tried to free myself, but she wasn't letting go. Fight or flight and mass panic took over, and I eventually fought my way free. I was coughing and sputtering water as I emerged. I remember looking at her and being just in shock. I think I began to ask why she did that, and she lunged at me again. She held my head underwater for what felt like a lifetime before I fought my way free again. Both times I genuinely thought that I was going to drown, and she didn't let me up. I literally had to fight my way free. I couldn't swim at this time, but the water in the lazy river and tunnel was maybe chest high at most. I began to backpedal away from her. She was giggling as if it was funny, and had this kind of crazed look and grin on her face. I couldn't just climb out and escape, as it was a tunnel, so I had to try and get out of there. As I was backpedaling, she was following me, and I made sure to keep distance so she couldn't lunge at me again, but she was gaining on me. I actually managed to reason with her as I was so scared of her. I was babbling at her. I tried to distract her by suggesting that we go on a water slide together. It worked, as I could see her thinking about it, and she stopped chasing me. I managed to exit the tunnel and the water, and she slowly followed me, but seemed a bit unsure. I immediately felt more safe as I was out of the water and could see other people. As we headed towards the slides, I kept talking all the way about how fun the slides were, etc., but she didn't really speak at all and had a really strange look on her face the full time. Anyway, after we went down the slides, I caught up with my friends and just stuck with them for the rest of the time as I was still a bit shook up. I never told them about it as it was a bit embarrassing to admit that a girl had tried to drown me and I was worried about getting teased. Anyway, fast forward to adulthood. This girl turned out to be a lesbian, not that there's anything wrong with that, but she got with a partner who had 2 to 3 kids from a previous relationship with this guy. It turns out that they would both torture the children and eventually killed one of them. She is currently serving a life sentence in prison. I told my friends about the swimming pool incident after hearing about her crimes, and I'm pretty sure they think I'm just bullshitting as none of them took me seriously. Maybe, as I kind of lightheartedly said, I was almost a victim number 1. However, nonetheless, this is a bit crazy to think back, as she was obviously a genuine psychopath, and if I'd never fought her off, if I didn't manage to escape and convince her to go down that slide, I genuinely believe that she would have killed me. This happened years ago, when I was barely 14. My middle school and the middle school of my best friend at the time organised a trip abroad to Great Britain. London, to be exact. It was supposed to be a few days looking at London's attractions, the museums, shops, etc. It was fun, at least until it wasn't. For as the day before we were supposed to leave and go home, we were brought to the streets with some interesting shops. From there we could see Golden Freddy, and we received free time for shopping. Our teachers and the guide had a brilliant idea. They told us after the time for shopping had ended that we have to meet at a different street than this. In retrospect, it was about 100 meters away, but they still shouldn't have done that. Most of us never had been in London. We were barely speaking English. We didn't have a map of the city. Roaming services didn't work correctly. In this instance, 90% of the students had gotten lost. I got lost with my best friend because we were in the complete opposite direction. We were both confused about the directions that we were given. We were walking along the pavement. My friend was running ahead, or staying behind to nervously look around. We didn't look like we were together, because we were not really interacting with each other. And I guess that's why this happened. My friend ran ahead and stopped to look around when I saw a black car approach me and match my speed. I started to feel like this was some sort of scene from a movie. It was broad daylight. There were lots of people around and no one even reacted. I was confused and didn't know what was happening. Then from the car stepped a man who said, "You are nice, come with me." and then he tried to grab me. The car was still running, so I suppose someone was still in it. I was stunned. I didn't believe it was real. At that moment, my friend ran up to me from behind, grabbed me by the arm and dragged me away. We ran and tried to lose the tail of the man in the car. After some time we stopped. My friend nervously cried, shaking me and screaming, "Why didn't you move when the man tried to catch you?" I explained that I had a deer in headlights moment. We cooled down and managed to ask some people for help, and we were found by our teachers. We didn't tell anyone what had happened. We were sure no one would believe us. And after that, when we got back, I told my parents, and they never let me go on a trip organized by my school again. My mum considered all of that really unprofessional and unreasonable. And to be honest, so do I. But anyway, man in the black car, let's not meet again. This story kinda creeps me out. It happened about 9 years ago or something. And it sometimes comes to my mind, and when it does, it really creeps me out. So, I was on an adult dating site, one of the fetish types. I know, don't judge. I was just looking for some fun, you know? Anyway, I was stupid and gave out more information than I should have. I was chatting with a girl. She asked me at some point what I do for work. At the time, I was working at McDonald's, so I told her. She asked which one, and I stupidly told her that too. We chatted off and on, and we hadn't been chatting for too long. I stupidly gave my phone number to her at some point as well. She would talk about how she wanted to meet me on my break and have some fun. I told her no thanks. I don't bring my lifestyle to my job. Anyway, I checked my messages just before I was due to clock out of work. Luckily I did, as she texted me and told me that she was at my job and what she had ordered. If I recall, it was a Big Mac meal. I was like, okay, well, don't expect me to do anything with you. I'm not interested. She then got upset and wasn't accepting that I wasn't interested. I was also scared because I had sent her a face picture of myself, but I had never received one from her. I really wasn't too interested in her, so I decided I didn't need a face picture since I likely wasn't going to meet up with her. Her interests weren't really what I was looking for, and I have a hard time straight up telling people that I'm not interested and just slowly start to ghost whoever I have no interest in. Now, luckily I hadn't told her my work schedule, so she didn't know what time I was going to clock out. Basically, what happened is, after I clocked out, I told one of my managers that I was on a dating site with some girl who had just shown up at my work, and I had no idea what she looks like, and that I was going to hang out in the back in the break room for a bit. Luckily, my manager didn't judge me and was just like, cool, do what you gotta do. I waited for about half an hour before I left. I didn't have a car at the time and had to walk home, so I was quite afraid that she would see me and try to pick me up in her car. Luckily, no one followed me, so I was in the clear. So, creepy girl that I met online, let's never meet. Update. I don't think she ever messaged me after, or maybe I ended up blocking her or something. I can't remember. I don't know if this is creepy in your opinion, but it really creeps me out that some random person just decided that she would show up at my job and expect me to want to meet up with her. So yeah, now I just give vague responses as to where I work. I don't work in the same town that I live in, so it would be hard to pinpoint my exact location, thankfully. But this did open my eyes and made me well and truly more aware of the information that I give out to strangers. For years, I didn't even remember that this had happened. I completely blocked it from my memory. I'm not exactly sure of my age at the time of this happening, but I believe I was around 4 or 5 years old. It was morning. My mum and I went to the pharmacy a couple blocks away from our home. As soon as she was getting back in the car, a man approached her from behind and told her to act as if she knew him. He then instructed her to sit in the passenger seat. She noticed that he had a gun, so completely complied. He sat in the driver's seat and drove. During the whole way, my mum tried to calm me, telling me that he was a friend and needed a ride, while I sat in silence. He drove us to a road where he got out of the car. He stole the money that my mother had had on her and told us not to call the police. After that, she just drove us back home. Almost a year ago, I was an opener at a resort, clocking in before 5 a.m. each day. The resort is located inside of a affluent neighborhood in a very wealthy town and suburb. Employees had to park in one of 2 parking lots at either ends of the property, and the lot I chose was adjacent to a long and windy road outside the resort which led to the rest of the neighborhood. The road and resort were separated by a short range of bush and trees that no one ever walked through. I arrived one morning per usual and put the car into park with my headlights still on. The lights in the lot weren't ever on in the morning since no one really showed up before 6 a.m. when the sun was out, so it was usually always pitch black at the start of my walk. Save for security, I was one of the first people to arrive at the property each morning and was usually completely alone in this particular parking lot at this time. This morning didn't seem any different. I had my hands wrapping around my keys and my brain was in the process of turning off the car when I noticed a young girl, maybe 14, 15 years old, come scampering out through the span of the trees that separates the resort from the outside of the road. She was directly in front of my car and my headlights illuminated a clear view in the pitch black. She was what looked to be a high schooler, had long blonde hair and was wearing a jacket with pajamas on. maybe. It was like she had just walked out of a house. One thing about her that bothered me was that she wouldn't stop laughing and smiling. I couldn't hear her laugh from the outside of the car, but she was visually giggling at something I wasn't aware of or couldn't see, and it was so unnatural. She occasionally glanced behind her as if someone else were there waiting away from the headlights. She then waved at me like it was a normal gesture at this time, and then immediately ran to my passenger side door. This all happened in a matter of seconds, and I wasn't really sure what had even happened, besides my anxiety spiking. I know I simultaneously yanked the aux from my phone to shut whatever song I had been playing off while grabbing for the lock button. I remember feeling panic for never remembering if it's up or down to lock when the girl began pulling violently and increasingly harder on the door handle. I realized, because I didn't turn my car off, that it had stayed locked. She was pounding on my window and I was screaming at the top of my lungs for her to leave before pressing on my horn. I could see her laughing outside like this was some type of game, as if I was silly. As if I was her friend, not letting her in as a joke. After a few seconds, she stopped pounding and trying to open the car door. Her face fell flat like I disappointed her, and she started to walk away from my car, back the way she came. She waved at me again before squeezing through the trees and out of the view of my headlights. This whole encounter confused me almost as much as it scared the shit out of me. Most people I told the story to just chalk it up to her being on drugs, but that narrative hasn't felt right to me. Despite her behavior, maybe she was just being an extremely out-of-touch teenager whose parents needed a firm grip on her. My first thought was possibly human trafficking, but I'm not sure if that would fit the scenario, as I'm not the most well-versed in the subject. I told someone when I made it to the resort, but they didn't really seem to care much. I didn't call the police, and I regret that. I'll never get it out of my brain how bloody terrifying it was, and that feeling in my stomach watching a stranger, seemingly alone, pop out from the trees in the darkness, laughing, and then try to violently enter my car in an empty parking lot. I do think the possibility is high that there was someone else present the whole time, which is a lot scarier to me. And it also leaves me wondering, who else was there, and where were they exactly? So, to the girl who wouldn't stop laughing while she tried to break into my car at 4 a.m, let's not meet again. This one's quite an odd story, I know, but it's the only way that I can really describe what had happened. This happened a few years ago, right before the pandemic hit. In fact, I know the exact date because it spooked me to my core. It was February 18th, 2020. I was 14 years old, so you can imagine it was pretty frightening. It was a terrifying moment for a young girl. My mother, younger brother, and I went to see a movie. My brother wanted to see the new Sonic film, and I didn't really want to, so I went to go watch the Birds of Prey movie. I had already seen it, but I just wanted to enjoy the cinema popcorn and hot dog, and quite frankly wanted to watch it again. I had gone off by myself to the viewing room, and it was completely empty, just me in there, so it felt relatively safe. Being able to see the whole room had just given that little bit extra bit of comfort. I was also at the very top, so I had a pretty good view of everything around me. I also want to add that it's pretty amazing having an entire theatre room to yourself, at least until it's not. About halfway through the film, I went to the restroom. The soda didn't last long. So I went, and once again, after I returned, it was just me in there. Every room was currently running a movie, so nobody really wanted to miss the films. As I was finishing up, there was a elderly woman at the sink, about 70, I think. I thought I was alone, but I suppose not. She was washing her hands right next to me, moving from her original spot. Now, for context, before I say what she said to me, I'll give you a brief description of myself. I have black hair, green eyes, relatively sharp features, high cheekbones and arched brows. Yeah, the typical Disney villain, which I somewhat blame for her response. I think I'm somewhat attractive, but nothing to lose your marbles over. Anyway, she looked over at me with the most subtle but unnerving grin, still with her hands under the water but not doing anything, and said, "Young lady, you are quite gorgeous, girl." I said, "Thank you," and she went on to say, "A beauty like you, that is only something an evil thing can have. Your eyes are just so hollow and soulless," she continued with that same damp smile. I was seriously starting to get creeped out, but I do live in the Bible Belt of Texas, so I chalked it up to her being some sort of nut job. But then she got closer and said with a smile on her face, "You shouldn't have that beauty." I hurried and left as soon as possible. I ran out the door and didn't even think about putting my hands under the dryer. I didn't like being alone with that woman anymore, and I waited outside the restroom where it was populated, but she never came out. After 5 minutes, I went back into the viewing room, and I was paranoid for the entirety of the rest of the film. I could not get that crazy lady out of my head. Like, who says that to a kid? I seriously considered getting exorcised by a priest after that encounter. After that, I told my mother, and she didn't let me go alone until I was at least 16. Never do I want to see that woman again. I still get paranoid after that. That any time that I'm alone in a public restroom, I'll see her again. In fact, to be fair, I'm now just avoiding public restrooms altogether, and I still don't know what to make of it. Anyway, crazy old lady in the movie bathroom. Let's not meet again. My mother was stationed at Kadena Air Force Base around the late 2010s, and being a military child at the age of 12, my life had reset once again. I didn't have friends. I had to learn an entire new neighborhood. I didn't really have anything that made me ecstatic. That is, except the Pokemon League that was held on base. It was run by a few people who earned their judges' cards from Nintendo and held tournaments and just open game nights. It was really fun picking up the card game, playing the video game. They even had a small gym, an Elite Four system. I made a lot of friends, and one of them was one of the judges, who I am thankful to still to this day, because if it wasn't for him, I may not be here right now. The judge in question, who I'll call Professor Getsu, for the sake of keeping them anonymous. They were a nice dude. He was the youngest of three and wore a white professor getup. He looked maybe on the edge of his teens, early 20s at most, with dark hair and glasses. He had a skinny frame. He was extremely helpful to newcomers, sort of like the big brother we could look up to and strive to beat in our children's cars and video games. Even if his name of Getsu was a bit nerdy, he was always one of the last people to leave, helping the cleanup, and he supposedly lived nearby. This last thing is important when it comes to what happened. It was a bit of a colder night when the event ended. I was sitting in the parking lot, scrolling through my memes, the ones that my friends had texted me, and waited for my parents to arrive to pick me up. I was kind of just zoning out as the time clicked by when I heard someone nearby call me. "Hey, girly, you playing Pokemon?" I would look up at some really big dude, kind of chubby looking. I saw him every now and then in the events, and he didn't really stand out that much. I gave him a small nod, said, "Yeah, I do," and he gives this wide smile, like creepy wide. He starts walking forward, and I am hit with his nasty smell, like bad body odor. I blink a bit as I see he's walking from a black sedan with its doors wide open. "I got this cool card collection. Come here, let me show you." Now, my parents have always taught me stranger danger, but my kid brain thought, hey, he went to the events and I saw him, so it should be fine. At least that's how I thought, until he grabbed my wrist and started dragging me towards the sedan. To say I immediately started screaming is an understatement. This guy didn't care though. He was still dragging me, saying how I will have fun and throwing out things about trading cards, like someone listening would think that he was dealing with a whiny kid. I honestly thought that I was going to be taken and that I would never see my mom and dad again. That I would be on the back of a milk carton and just never seen. Silly, I know, but I was a rather sheltered kid. And I didn't really know much about dying and death at the time. Thankfully though, Professor Getsu had walked out that very moment, presumably on his way home. All I know is I hear the sound of fabric hitting this dude's face as Professor had swung his professor's coat right into the dude's face. I feel his hands go to where the dude's grabbing my arm, and I see his hand grab this dude's pinky finger and yank it back hard. This guy yelled like an animal as Professor pushed him and pulled me back. Behind me as he yanked his coat off the dude, he then kicked at the back of this dude's knee as he caused him to buckle. The professor then grabbed his wrist and pulled back on them. This beast of a man groaned. It sounded even more pained as Professor looked at him with just this cold look in his eyes. The big brother figure was gone and something else was in its place, and I think I was a bit scared of it. Professor's tone of voice when he spoke didn't help either, like icy daggers lingering with his words against this abominable human. If I see you back here or doing this shit to my charges, this will pale in the comparison to what Japanese prisons will do to you. The man scrambled away and got into his car and peeled out of the parking lot, Professor glaring at him till he was out of sight. He would then guide me inside of the venue, buy me some fish and chips, and sit down with me until my parents arrived. That cold persona that he had when he was kicking that dude was gone, and he was back to being the big brother. The one that I knew. To be frank, that frightened me. I didn't quite understand why the teenager was so aggro. As I said, I was sheltered. I only later learned that Professor Getsu was a black belt who taught kids how to defend themselves with his mother at the local activity center. I suspect he had something of a protective persona or something in his own life which led him to act in such a way. He explained the situation to my parents when they arrived. I wasn't allowed to go to the events in the league as much as I used to, but I did get to go from time to time. Professor Getsu was still his normal self at the events and helping people, but he would stop coming to the events a year afterwards, his license having expired and his father moving out of the country soon. Now that I am reaching about the same age as he was, and I have a little sibling of my own, I sympathize with how, for a brief moment, he became something so terrifying just to make sure that I was safe. Oh, and as for that fat, stinking beast, he never showed up to the events. And that was either because he was banned or just scared of Professor Getsu. I wish the professor a good life, and I hope that he's doing well. As for Stinky, I wish that we never meet ever again.